The humanitarian crisis in northern Ethiopia is growing worse by the day.
Good afternoon. This is Informed Perspectives on Cyberpowered Tigray Media. Welcome. Today I have a special guest, Duke Burbridge, and we will be talking about a very important topic with regard to data, IDPs, and implications of withholding data by some agencies in the United Nations. Before we do that, we will cover certain topics. Let me see. Let me go to, there is some technical problem going on. Yeah, so I think to start with, I will have my take, which I do usually when I was doing Informed Perspectives 2 years ago. So there was some hiatus in between, but you know, definitely it was not because there were no issues to discuss. It was because of other priorities that came up. So as you know, I just came back from Tigray after 3 weeks of visit, and today we are not going to be speaking about that, but the topic today has some implications even to what I observed, what I have seen with my eyes during my 3 weeks visit in Tigray, my home state or my home nation. So let me now go directly to. So as you know, Tigray has been going on through crisis for more than 3 years. Definitely, the crisis precedes a little bit before that, the humanitarian crisis, but it became glaring and very, very challenging over 3 years because of the war, which is confounded by several events, including famine, siege, failure of rain, definitely, and sometimes also unseasonal rain that has affected the production of food and harvest of crops. So we know also in the past couple of years, we have published data related to the status of health facilities in Tigray, which was published in BNG Global Health. And recently, we also published with colleagues at Eider Hospital in Mekelle in the Lancet Global Health about what is going on with neonatal mortality. So with this background, recently, actually, I got this from my guest, the information. We learned that a very critical data set for IDP site assessments by the IOM or the Institute of Migration, where it has this data unit, was withheld for not officially disclosed reasons. After we had this, I had a conversation with Duke and one of my colleagues called James Cochran. So we initiated to writing a letter to ask for the official release of this data. Well, as we were thinking about that, we thought maybe one vehicle is to use existing organizations to put together a letter and write this official letter to IOM. So one of the organizations that I am a founder of and currently president, which is Peace and Justice for Tigrayans International, we took the initiative to write a letter in collaboration, of course, with Duke Burbridge, my guest today, and also with Professor Jim Cochran, which both co-signed as co-authors too. And then we invited several Tigray diaspora organizations to be co-signers of this letter. We completed the write-up about May 14, and the morning of, actually early morning of May 15, we sent out the letter to IOM DTM, which is the data tracking unit for the Institute of Migration at the UN. And luckily, with coincidence or otherwise, the data was released in May 16, 2024. So does the release data set provide the usually detailed IDP assessment data that we have been looking for, or we are looking for, or some agencies are looking for? What is the importance of the data? What are the important implications for the internally displaced people in the Tigray region, as well as even far beyond the Tigray region? Those are some of the questions that we will be addressing with my guest, Duke Burbridge, today. Well, in that letter that we wrote, we clearly asked, for the release of this current data, which was around 35 assessments of these IDP situations in Tigray and other places. And also really we asked for future, on-time release of such data so that it helps policymakers as well as people who are working on the ground. As part of my take, I really like to call also to action our brothers and sisters in the Tigray diaspora, because this collaboration was an eye-opener. We have done before similar things, but this one was really had an immediate result. So we shouldn't be letting up. Let's demand IOM and other UN organizations to vigorously document the crimes that continue to be committed against civilians in Tigray. The situation of the IDPs, or the internally displaced, and the dire state of civilian infrastructure, including health facilities in Tigray. We should also, not let up to demand the IOM and other UN organizations to release data on a timely basis and in complete and accessible manner. We should demand also the international community to stop its double standard and help stop Tigray genocide, since due to the fact that these internally displaced people are still in camps, they are suffering from morbidity and mortality. As they say in Tigrinya, "Zahadara Adaw, Arka Yesumba." I think if we come together, if we pull together, we can always win. So the Tigray diaspora organizations need to continue their collaboration, as that is really the way to get to a solution. Okay, so thank you so much, Duke, for joining me today. Well, I will introduce you in a second, but before that, maybe let me give you an opportunity to give a rejoinder to what I stated as my take today.
Yeah, Yeah. First, thank you for having me. This is a very important subject, and it's something that hasn't been covered very well, not only by the humanitarian agencies that should be collecting this data, but also by the media and anybody else. It's sort of a forgotten issue that has been forgotten by everybody except for the people who care about the people who are in these displacement hosting sites, which is tragically few people, it seems. Um, this, I remember that about a week ago, I was talking about the IDP data being so old. We were talking about the conditions that existed in September of last year, and it hadn't been updated. It hadn't been updated for almost several months. And at that point, the data is not useful anymore because it is. I mean, the people are stuck in these IDP camps. They're not able to go anywhere, but their conditions should be changing, and particularly with this new assessment should have come out after food was distributed. So that, I think, that was the urgency of trying to get this data out. And yeah, we wrote the letter and sent it in. The next day it came out, possibly coincidentally, but I'd like to think that they were encouraged at least to get that stuff out. But as we will go into, the data was unfortunately lacking, and we'll go into that, I think, over the course of the program. But it was very good to see that the data was released in the first place. I mean, that's a good thing, and I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be able to explain some of what we're seeing, and some of what I be able to give you an idea of what they found in September a little bit better than what they found in December, because as I said, the data was very lacking for December. But I hope that it'll be informative to everybody. And like you said, if everybody comes together, I mean, there's a group of people that have forgotten about the people who are displaced in Tigray right now and have no place to go. There's no option for them. Their land is occupied. Their homes are occupied. They face ethnic cleansing if they try to go back. So they can't go anywhere. And they're still surviving. They're still living. And I think it's up to us to keep pushing for their human rights, for their aid to get to them, for them to be able to survive this ordeal, because these are all genocide survivors. Every single person that's in a displacement camp in Tigray is a survivor of genocide. And God knows how they're doing it. God knows how they've survived this long. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that they get to a point where they can go back home, and at least while they're still stuck in these camps, they can get the aid that they need, particularly the children who don't know any place but these camps in many cases. They've been there 3 years, 2 years in some cases. There are children that don't remember anything but living in a displacement site or living with a friend or a relative who's probably themselves in food insecurity. So this is I'm very glad to be having this conversation with you today.
Yeah, I think you raise important points. Actually, that would take me back to my visit in March, because when I visited in March, I went there for 3 weeks, and I had the opportunity really to travel between Mekelle and Aksum through two different directions. So along the way, we had the opportunity also to see what the status of the internally displaced people is or are. And they are still in crowded shelters, no enough services, social services. Definitely, they are even adding to the challenging situation with regard to education, health, and other uh, you know situations in those cities and towns that they live in, because some IDPs are living in schools still. That means kids who could have gone to those places to learn are missing school, or even if they go there, they are being crowded. So that is really a very, very challenging situation. The other concern that I have been really hearing is the fact that the rainy season is again coming. You can imagine last summer, last rainy season, all these camps, the tents were flooded. I mean, it is really tough to stay in those camps during the rainy season, especially when there is good rainy season in that area.
Yeah.
So that has been also another issue of an anxiety, on the people. And as we speak, they are still there, and the rains are going to come pretty soon. So it is a very, very dire situation, Duke. But definitely this data is going to be a step in the right direction. So let me, we just delved in, Duke and I know each other really now quite well through social media on Twitter, and then also Twitter Space or X Space. He is, a very consummate humanitarian. Uh, and amazingly, I call him another brother from a different mother. I have more melanin than he does, but he is concerned about Tigray as much as I am. And he is serving even with our Tigray diaspora organizations as an advisory member to the board for SPN for Tigray. But he has worked in international organizations and has a lot of experience, over 15 years of experience in that. Uh, and so I am glad that our paths connected. When people ask me, say one good thing about, the war that has happened in Tigray, and I say, as you guys say, like in the West, the silver lining is knowing people like you, knowing
Yeah.
a lot of friends of Tigray, a lot of humanitarians, a lot of people concerned about people that they have never seen, they have never met. And you were telling me yesterday that you are looking forward to make that first visit to Tigray, and
Absolutely.
definitely people are listening to us now. They will be asking, when are you coming, Duke? When are you coming, Duke? And even I will get a lot of phone calls, Duke. Oh,
Very
next time
soon.
you are coming, you better bring him with you. So that's going to happen, Duke. So welcome. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining me on after I think my first show after 2 years. So we are beginning it with you, and this definitely is not going to be the last one.
Good.
So anything to add to your, small biography, short biography that I just described?
No, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. And I would also say that the silver lining for me has been to meet everybody from the community and allies of Tigray and people in the diaspora, and just everybody's been so wonderful. And I just I feel like I've made so many new friends in the past 3 years, and it's terrible the events that have brought us together, but to be connected to so many people who are worried about their families, worried about their people, and doing something about it, which is a wonderful thing to see. It restores my faith in humanity to see that there are people who are not living in the situation, but they are still doing everything they can to try to make things better, to try to help people in Tigray, and that's a wonderful thing to see. I hope that continues, and I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will, because I think people are very invested in seeing a beautiful future for Tigray, and I am too. So it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be connected to everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. So to start, the conversation, this give me some background about what the IOM IDP assessment data is or are, and uh, let's start there actually. So what are the key features of this data, and why are they important?
Sure. This is the data that's put out by the IOM DTM unit, the displacement tracking matrix. This data stands out as the most comprehensive, systematic, rigorous assessment of the people in the displaced, people who are displaced right now in Tigray, also people who have returned. There's a companion report that comes out to these, which looks at villages where people have recently returned from being displaced. This started, this unit's been around for a while, I believe, but they first started doing these assessments back in 2021. Their first survey period ended in January 2021. They did this on an emergency basis. They called it the Northern Ethiopia Crisis, where they were looking at displacement in Amhara, Afar, and of course in Tigray. And this data, it captures so much about the living conditions, about the critical conditions of life these households, these families, these individuals who are displaced are facing on a daily basis, and they really dig into it. Like, instead of, you'll see reports from places like the World Food Program or UN OCHA, where they really cherry pick the data that's going to make the response look more effective, or they'll cherry pick data that's going to make it seem that there's a parity between Tigray and elsewhere in Ethiopia, because they really want, of course, from a political perspective, they really want to say we're just distributing aid everywhere. We're helping people, everybody in every region, and that makes sense to donors. That makes sense to a lot of the humanitarian organizations. But this data really gets down to the nitty gritty of how people are living and what conditions they're facing. Now, in September 2023, this was the previous round 34 came out in September 2023, and they surveyed 2,500 displacement sites. They asked them a long list of questions. They really got into it, but as you can see, most of the displaced people were in Somali region, Oromia, and Tigray. By far, this is about 3 million of the 3.5 million people who are displaced were displaced in these three regions. If you look at Amhara, there is about 66,000. Of course, it should be understood that in Amhara, there is a lot of that region that couldn't be accessed, just like in Tigray. In Tigray, there's a lot of area in Tigray that cannot be accessed by the assessment teams because it's being occupied illegally by either Amhara regional troops, Fano, or the Eritrean military. And they're known to target humanitarian workers or people doing assessments. So there's these are incomplete. There are sites that they weren't able to get to, that they weren't able to access. However, as one would imagine, these areas that are not safe enough for people to do assessments are usually not areas where a lot of people are displaced to. That's usually the areas where they're displaced from. So they missed some. I don't know if it's a lot, but they missed some. But these were the most people. There were about 500,000 children under the age of 5 years old in Somalia, Oromia, and Tigray. In Tigray, there's about 122,000 children under 5 years old. That's a huge amount of people, as everybody can well understand. But this is the only systematic assessment of how these guys are doing, like what they're facing. If you look at the chart here, the comparison of Tigray versus national averages, you can see some of the questions that were asked, some of the observations that were made here. You look at it when they're asking, do they have cooking sets? Now, some of this stuff is going to sound a little strange from the Western point of view. Like a cooking set, we think of a beautiful kitchen, and you get a 80-piece pots and pans and everything. When they talk about a cooking set, what they mean is, do you have the utensils to eat? Do you have a plate? Do you have a pot to boil the water in? That's a cooking set. A bedding set is, do you have a mat to sleep in? Do you have a blanket? Do you have a pillow? A hygiene kit is just basic water, soap. These are, whenever you look at these things, think about the bare minimum that you need to survive. That's what they're talking about here. And you see in Tigray, it's less than 5% of people in Tigray have any of those things, who are displaced. Now, the national average is not much better than that, but it is better. I mean, we're looking at 7.5 or in some cases 9.5% of people that have access to those very important things. But then you get to things like clean water for drinking and enough water for bathing and for washing and stuff like that. Tigray has a very low access to that. Maybe a quarter of the people, not quite a quarter of the people had enough clean water for drinking. That's lower than the national average of displaced people. Did they get any non-food items last year from humanitarian groups? Was there any distribution whatsoever? Only less than 2% of displaced people in Tigray had access to non-food items, were given non-food items from an organization. Now, that is not necessarily consistent with what we've been hearing from organizations, because they put pictures up of people getting food, or not getting food, but people getting items, getting blankets, getting all of these things. They take 80 pictures for every blanket that they distribute. But when you look at this, when you can see how many people, how many sites say that they've received it, it's not very many at all. Another thing I wanted to look at here is the opportunity to work. Are they able to do anything to get money outside of the displacement camp? In Tigray, only about 14% of sites had any access to, the economy, the local job market. Was there any work for them to do at all? Of course, as we understand, the economy of Tigray was dismantled by the occupying forces. The economy has collapsed and it hasn't come back yet in the way that it needs to be able to support vocations for everybody. There's a lot of work to be done in Tigray, but there's not a lot of money to pay anybody to work. You see the national average for an IDP in Ethiopia, 71% were able to access some way of earning a livelihood. But in Tigray, this is less than 14%. So these families, these households, they're really dependent on assistance. There is not an ability for them to make money on their own to get food. I mean, all of their resources, many people have been displaced more than once. So all of their resources are just what they can carry. And those have usually been exhausted well before now, because they probably didn't plan on staying here for 3 years. And you look at some of the other numbers here, which I'll go into a little bit more, is the observable signs of malnutrition. Now, the national average for those was about 2/3 of sites had observable signs of malnutrition. In Tigray, this was 97% of sites. Almost every site in Tigray, there were observable, you could see that people were malnourished. You could see people starving as you walk down the streets, as you walk through the camps. That's a huge indicator that there's a real problem. Access to land for cultivation, about 1/3 of the people who are displaced in Ethiopia have access to land. In Tigray, that's only about 1.5%. The same with livestock, very similar. And are there any livelihood programs being implemented by service providers? This is very low across Ethiopia, only 3%, but in Tigray, they couldn't find a single site out of the 667 sites that they visited that had a livelihood program that was functional. So this shows you that there's a vast difference between the situation in Tigray and in the national average. That's one thing that I wanted to highlight. There's been a lot of talk about, if you'll remember, the German MP went over to UN OCHA and said, what's going on with Tigray? And he said, well, we can talk about Tigray, and then we can talk about the real problems. Now that seems to be the theme of 2024 from UN OCHA, and it seemed like it was probably the theme of 2023 as well, where they downplay Tigray, the needs of the people of Tigray, or they try to make it seem that Tigray is suffering just as everybody else is. Now, of course, there are people outside of Tigray in Ethiopia who are suffering. There are people outside of Ethiopia in the Horn of Africa who are suffering. Now, that's absolutely true, and there's an absolute need for humanitarian assistance in places like Amhara, places like Oromia and Somali. But the need in Tigray is very, very higher, is much, much higher than it is elsewhere, empirically. Anytime they do an assessment, this shows, and it definitely shows in this case. If you look at the access to food and malnutrition, the access to food and the incidence of malnutrition, you can really see the problem here.
Yeah, let me actually, I would like to discuss that part because
Sure.
our latest Lancet Global Health publication, which was led by one of the faculty investigators at IDER School of Public Health, Dr. Mache, is that we looked at sources of mortality, risk factors for mortality, and definitely malnutrition, acute severe malnutrition, is one of the top ones. So, looking at this signs of malnutrition just only in these IDPs, and this is in the round 34, right?
Yeah.
Which was kind of maybe we are talking about 2023, right?
Yeah, September 2023.
2023. So it is 97%.
Yeah.
I mean, you can literally, we are talking about everyone, right? Every kid.
But it's not 97% of the people there. It's 97% of the sites had visible signs of malnutrition at the site. So that's something that it's a little bit difficult. I wish they measured people. I wish they actually had malnutrition assessments of each site. That would take a long time, and they don't do that. But what this is just an observation from the assessment team saying, yes, at this site we could see that there was malnutrition, that there were people in the streets starving, or there were children, who were obviously malnourished. That's what that says.
Yeah.
But yes, every single
Okay.
site, just about every single site, the people there are living with starvation at their doorstep, quite literally at their doorstep.
So they are pretty much characterizing. So they may have a certain threshold to say a site has signs of malnutrition. So I mean, what I have seen in my eyes, and even the data, the survey data that we analyzed and published, indicates that malnutrition, even severe malnutrition, is pervasive in not only in these IDP camps, but also in the general population in general. So it is, I think this signifies to some extent also the relevance and the importance of this data set. The other point that struck me is the fact that really when it comes to IDP site assessment, where you would get one, of course, robust, systematic, but also more credible data, it is really through this IOM DTM unit, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is the most credible data that I think that we have on IDPs. I am not aware of a better document or a better assessment or a better data set than what we get from the DTM.
Yeah. So the food and non-food survey that they did around November, December, that was released in January, where actually we wrote a viewpoint on Ethiopian Insight with a couple of my colleagues. So in that report, it was clear that one, they could do they could actually classify the problem. Maybe some of it is due to unseasonal rain, some of it is due to, of course, drought, and then they have also some data about IDPs and things like that. So they may have had some opportunity to probably look into the people in the camps, in the IDP camps themselves. So I think we have some more data about, I believe, about
Yeah.
this round 34 before I go to round 35.
Yeah, absolutely. And round 34, and what you say is there are a lot of assessments that try to include displaced people, and it should be easy because you know where they are. But in most cases, in all of the emergency food assessments, for example, they missed the displaced population. They didn't go to those sites. In some of the ones afterwards, they tried to include them, but they included them in a small number that was not a representative sample like they had in the other regions. To do this correctly, you really have to focus. It really has to be an exhaustive site or an exhaustive assessment, and that's what DTM does. But if you look at the next slide here, the access to food and malnutrition, this is where I want to really go deeper into the data here. When you look at just sites that said they had no access to food or to food assistance, they were given three possible responses, which is one, yes, on site, two, yes, off site, or three, no access whatsoever. And what's great about this data is that if they say on site, they say, well, when was the last time it was distributed? If they say it's off site, they say, how far do you have to travel to get it? Because of course, if something's an hour away, you can knock out anybody who is the very young, the very old, anybody who has difficulties with mobility, which is, from my experience in post-conflict environments, is a huge number of people. Anybody who's pregnant, anybody who's carrying a child. If they're carrying a child, they may not be able to carry a 40-pound bag of food back from a distribution site, so they go into pretty deep there. But if you just look at the camps here and the people that have no access to food aid, you'll see that in Tigray, it's 82%. This is every other region, and I just looked at the four regions, the top three here in Amhara, where you see it's less than 50% across the board have no access to food assistance. In the case of Amhara, they had the most advantageous position. They were a quarter of them didn't have access to food. Now that's a huge problem. A quarter of the people in Amhara not having access to food. That's a huge problem. That's something that needs to be addressed. But when you look at Tigray, it's 82% of sites. That's so much worse. Now, of course, sites that don't have access to food are generally less popular with IDPs. They'll leave those sites usually if they can, if they have the means to. So you see, it's only about 73% of IDPs who live in the sites that don't have access to food, and only 72% of the children who don't have access to food. But we're talking about 72% of more than 100,000 children are living at sites where there's absolutely no access to food assistance. The only place they're getting, the only way that they're getting food is from community donations. That's the only thing that's keeping them alive. The humanitarian response has completely failed in those cases. These are some of the numbers that should have changed around after food aid was restarted, after August, as in the case of the World Food Program, after December in the case of USAID. But then you also look at the observable signs of malnutrition. Here you see that 94% of IDPs in Tigray were living in camps where you could see signs of malnutrition, where people were starving in the streets. 93% of children, 93% of the children were walking past starving people or starving themselves every day. If you look at other places, this was lower, but still not incredibly lower. If you look at Oromia, you're still at 72% of sites, 70% of IDPs are living in places that have obvious signs of malnutrition, observable signs of malnutrition. Of course, things were a little bit better in Amhara, where only about 10% of people and 10% of children were living in sites that had observable signs of malnutrition. That's a big difference, and it appears that food assistance was getting to the people of Amhara. Thank goodness the civilians that are living in displacement camps, food was getting there. Malnutrition was at a much lower rate. Those are very good signs, but you still have this huge disparity between how IDPs in some areas are being cared for and how they're being cared for in Tigray and how they're being cared for in Oromia and Somali. It's to have this happen in the same country without real obstacles to getting to delivering services there is very unfortunate. Now, I should say, I should make a note when I say having access to food aid, this doesn't mean that there's regular access. If they say yes, it's available on site, this doesn't mean that they get a food drop off every 6 weeks or every month or every 2 months. Sometimes it's been more than 3 months since they, particularly in the Somali region. In most cases, it had been more than 3 months since they had received food, but they had received food within 3 months in a lot of cases, and in the other places they had received food more regularly. But if we look down at maybe we should go to if we look at the Northwest Zone, this is where I really wanted to focus on, is in the Northwest Zone, the number of sites that didn't have access to food, that had absolutely no access to food, that was 143 sites out of 149 that didn't have access to food. We're talking about 300,000 people out of 324,000 people. We're talking about 37,000 children under 5 years old out of 39,000 children under 5 years old had absolutely no access to food aid. No food assistance, no food aid. So when the communities surrounding them don't have enough food, even for their own families, even for themselves, they're not able to provide food for displaced families that are there. This is a huge problem because, and even if they could for a while, that's not stable. You don't know that they're going to have enough food next week or next month, but you do know that every child under 5 years old is going to need food in that periods of time. And if you look at the observable signs of malnutrition in the Northwestern Zone, these are extremely high. 146 camps had observable signs of malnutrition. These are most of the people. If you look at the children under 5 years old, there were only about 350 children who were living in camps that did not have observable signs of malnutrition. This means it's pretty much ubiquitous across the Northwest Zone. But this is something that also shows up in the malnutrition survey. This was a survey that was conducted back in July of 2023. This is the last time that nutritional data was released from Tigray, was during these Smart Plus surveys. And this was mischaracterized by UN OCHA, who said that everything was pretty much the same across the board, across the different regions. What they did was they took one measurement of malnutrition, which is the weight to height Z-score, which pretty much says how bad is malnutrition compared to the other people in your region, rather than looking at the middle upper arm circumference, which is a more reliable metric. It's also a measure that's a better predictor of mortality, which is very important. It's also the measure that they use in the field to see whether or not a child needs services. So this is the important one. But when you collect them both, you combine the two and you take out anybody If you want to go back up to the yeah, if you combine the two and you take out anybody that appears in both measures, and you just look at everybody who's malnourished minus the people who appear in both, and you're looking at a 32% malnutrition rate. This is higher than the threshold for famine. The threshold for famine is 30. This is higher than the threshold for famine in the Northwest zone. This is very important that we're talking about in the Northwest zone here, because this is the area that they could have looked, if they want to look back, if they could have looked to see if food had been distributed to the IDP hosting sites in those areas. If you want to look at the next slide here, it shows what I'm talking about. This is the number of 6 week rations that were distributed in Tigray. Now, before August, it was completely shut down since March. In August, the World Food Program slowly started ramping up their capacity to deliver food. They did it on a pilot basis, but the World Food Program serves the Northwest zone. It also serves Mekelle. It also serves the lower half of the southern zone, the part that's primarily still occupied. They were able to deliver about 1.8 million rations of food over the past 3 months leading up to this round 35, the data that was just released a couple of days ago. In September, when they did this before, they had only done a trial, a pilot test to see if the food to see if this new system that they put together was going to work. So what we should have seen from this new data was just about every IDP site in the Northwest zone should have been able to say, we received food within the past 3 months. That's what we should have seen. It should have gone from 3 to all of them. Unfortunately, they didn't collect this data. If you have any questions up to here about I hope I didn't lose anybody so far.
No, I think yeah. This is really fantastic. Actually, definitely. Unless you are familiar with how to listen to data kind of presentations, which is my life, my daily life that I teach, that I live in. It could sometimes become challenging, but I think the way you are presenting it is clear, and the charts are not very complex at all. They are labeled very well. So
Sure.
The Northwest, and of course, as 40% of Tigray, proper Tigray, is still under occupation. That
Right.
means these people are under a lot of stress from different angles. So it's not surprising that there is that much, and 300,000 children with no access to food aid. It's I mean, difficult to bear. So I think thank you for bringing that to light for those who are listening. So I think in the interest of time, let's go to what brought us together to this
Sure.
conversation, round 35.
Yeah.
So round 35, we will speak about the data, but so to just give a summary for those who are just joining us. I am here on Informed Perspectives with Duke Burbridge. We are talking about what is going on really with release of IDP site assessment by the International Organization for Migration. It is data tracking unit. And what is problematic is we believe that there is unfair, unreasonable delay in the release of the data, but also as Duke would demonstrate in the next few minutes, that even the released data has some gaps when it comes to the assessment of the IDP sites in Tigray. So, Duke, let's jump in. Let's delve into round 35. What do you see in round 35?
In round 35, they did another assessment of all of the IDP sites. There is slightly fewer people in these sites, and that concerns me a great deal because it's a very big difference in how people leave the sites. One thing that's very disconcerting to me is there doesn't seem to be anyone who's actually tracking to see how many people are dying in these sites. That's a huge oversight. I haven't seen, I mean, the mortality study they collected from some places, but not all. There needs to be a better tracking of that because it does not appear that that data is available anywhere. But people who leave sites, who leave with food, with the ability to restart their lives is one thing. People that have to leave a site because there's no food there, because nobody's providing any services, because there's not enough water, that's a whole different story. These are people who are just desperately wandering, trying to find food, trying to find what they need to keep their children and themselves alive. That's a whole different story altogether. But you see that the number has decreased slightly of the IDPs everywhere. You look at Amhara and it's increased significantly. Now that's due to the fact that they had better access in Amhara the second time around. So, but we're only up to about 140,000. There's probably more that they haven't found, but so this would put them in as the fourth highest region, but certainly well below the rest of the Somali, Oromia, Tigray is still where the overwhelming majority of IDPs are. One thing that we did get from the data is the origin of the largest group in the site. That's one thing that they track that's very helpful. And we see in Tigray still 485 of the 666 hosting sites, the largest group of people are from Western Tigray. And these are people that cannot go home right now because their land has been stolen, their land's been taken. And this has become a political issue that people are talking about the politics of who's going to control, I don't know, the sesame farming or whatever. But to the people at these sites, this is the big thing is they need to get home. They need to get back to their farms. They need to get back to their houses, their businesses, whatever they're doing. They need to get back home and they can't. They cannot get back home until that issue is resolved. You'll also see that there's people from the eastern zone, from areas like Irob that cannot go home because that land is still stolen. Also in the northwestern zone, there are places that are still stolen. Also in the southern zone. So we see that there are a lot of people still in these sites that, contrary to what the prime minister has said, that most people have gone home, they haven't. They're still at these hosting sites. They also track the date of arrival. It looks like there's still 40,000 people last year came to displacement sites. There is supposed to be a time of peace. 40,000 people came to displacement sites, but most people have been there for 1 to 2 years. Smaller amount has been there for the duration of the war. And if you look at 5+ years, this shows you what the IDP situation was prior to the war. You have 3,300 people were displaced. So this has been an extreme jump in the number of IDPs. But what they didn't do in these assessments, and bring us to the crux of the matter, what they didn't do in these assessments is they didn't ask the same questions that they asked in the last round. Not in Tigray, not in Oromia, not in Somalia, not where you have 3 million IDPs. They didn't ask these questions. They didn't ask them if food had gotten to them. They asked the question in Amhara only. Now in Amhara, 21% of the children, I'm just looking at children under the age of 5 right now, 21% of children under the age of 5 had no access to food distribution. In December, only 11% had no access to food distribution. The amount of places where it was delivered on site had jumped about 20%, almost 20%. Things have looked up in Amhara. Things are a little bit more positive, and thank goodness for that. However, in Tigray, the December assessment should have given us a table like this for Tigray. We should have known of the 100,000 children that are still displaced in Tigray, how many of them are living in camps that do not have access to food. That should have been 0 in the Northwest Zone. It should have been 0 in Mekelle, where the World Food Program had started up again. They distributed 1.8 million rations at that point. That should have made it to everybody there. But we do not, either they did not collect this data for round 35, which would have been a very questionable decision to make, given the fact that they knew that the lack of access to food and malnutrition in round 34 was so extreme in Tigray, was so extreme in also in Oromia, also in Somali. To ignore those regions and only focus on Amhara would have been a huge strategic blunder if they didn't collect this information. If they did collect this information and they didn't report it, they didn't release it, now we have a whole different problem, because now we have to wonder why. Why won't they tell us if the IDP sites, if the people at the IDP sites have seen any food? Because they were supposed to be receiving food. They were supposed to be receiving food during the suspension. They said that the EDRMC was distributing food. That's highly questionable whether or not that happens, because they lie a lot. But whether or not they got food should have come out in this assessment. This is why I was pushing for this assessment, to see if IDPs had gotten food, and we don't have that data because they either didn't collect it or they're not reporting it. And this has been a trend in Tigray. This has been a trend, not in Tigray, but this has been a trend in issues that are facing Tigray. Data is not being collected. The emergency food assessment hasn't been done since February of last year. The last mortality assessment ended in July, prior to the real onset of the lean season, prior to the failed harvest. The nutritional aid delivery dashboard, we used to get this used to be updated every month. That hasn't been updated since December 2023. The one that looks at Tigray, specifically the one that shows us how many IDPs were admitted, how many children of IDPs were admitted for treatment of severe acute malnutrition. We just don't have that data anymore. They stopped doing it. The food cluster stopped publicly releasing weekly food distribution updates. They're still available. If you know somebody, you can get them, but they stopped releasing those publicly. The last malnutrition assessment was the one I just showed you there. That was actually, they did that for every region. It wasn't just in the Northwest. They did it for every region, but they only released it for 3 regions, the Northwest, the Eastern, and I believe the Southeastern zones. But that was the last time they released a malnutrition assessment, and they mischaracterized the data. Like I said, they took one measure, they excluded the more reliable measure, they took the less reliable measure, because the less reliable measure showed a parity between Tigray and the rest of Ethiopia, and that's what they used, and that's what they said. So they're lying about how many children are really starving to death in Tigray, and they're not doing it. They're not publishing more assessments. If they're doing more assessments, I haven't been able to access them. So that's what we've seen in 2024, is that the humanitarian organizations are doing a better job erasing Tigray than the multinational invasion force that came to kill civilians. The humanitarian organizations are operating with absolute disregard for the people that they're trying to serve. They've taken the humanity out of humanitarianism, and this is a shameful situation. And there needs to be, in my opinion, an investigation of what's happening in Ethiopia, why we're hearing the head of UNOCHA say that the problems in Tigray aren't really significant, why they're going so far away from the data to show that Tigray is no worse off than anybody else. All of this data comes from the UN. All of this data comes from the same agencies that are denying that things are worse in Tigray. They're denying their own data, or they're not reading it. And this has become a huge problem, and people are dying because of it. It's a lethal problem. This is not something you can spin. This is not something that you can, forgive my language, this is not something you can bullshit. This is something that you have to be able to nail if you're distributing food if you're distributing malnutrition supplies, you have to know how many people need food. That's all. That's what you have to have. That's what you have to do your job. They don't have that. They're either pretending not to know it, or they absolutely don't know it. That calls into question this new system of distributing aid that's supposed to be working wonderfully for everybody. That calls into question their system of distributing malnutrition supplies. It seems that the lives of Tigrayans do not matter. The lives of people in Oromia, the lives of people in Somali, they don't matter. That's what it seems like. It seems like it's not even important enough for them to collect data on, or if they do collect data, it's not even important enough for them to release. And that is a very scary situation, because the last time we checked, the last time they released data, the IDPs in Tigray were in a lot of trouble. And so we need to see new data. And hopefully, I believe right now, there should be assessment teams on the ground. This should be when they start ramping up for the next round. I hope to God that they will change their policies and change their practice and focus on Tigray and focus on the people of Tigray who are displaced, who need aid very desperately, or in very desperate situations. And I hope that they will report on that data. I hope that they'll report the data from round 35. I hope that maybe they collected it and they just didn't put it in there. That happens from time to time, but I don't know. I'm not holding out hope.
Yeah,
So
well,
that's where I am.
maybe we pushed them, we nudged them enough that they couldn't wait another week to put this additional detailed
I
data
hope so. I hope
about
so.
Tigray and this
We need to put
especially given.
pressure on them.
Yeah, so I think that as we wrap up, we are about out of time. I think the message is clear. One, we have learned that if we work together for the same cause, not only really within the Tigray diaspora organizations, but we have friends of Tigray here and there, and I think we can make a difference. We can have an impact. So that is lesson number one to me. Lesson number two, and I think even as we see even the release of this data, I am so thankful and grateful that you were able to dig in and find out some of the gaps. But even our Tigray diaspora experts in this field should be looking into this data and see if there are even some additional gaps. And those could help us, actually, the system itself, the UN, to address them in the next round of data collection or data release. So it is a service also to the data tracking unit at the IOM or at the UN. So this is lesson number two. And to me, the last one, but not least, is that really the IDPs in Tigray that I have seen. I mean, before I traveled to Tigray, of course, I had a lot of anxiety, depression, all that fear about what could have been happening, over the last 3 years. And I went there, and as you know, I have been publishing really in major journals about what's going on in health facilities, the malnutrition crisis, the mortality crisis, and all that. Even I was analyzing this raw data. My sense was maybe there is a hope that it may not be as bad. That actually I had some little hope. When I went there, I found it to be even much worse. I went to places where people are, don't have anything to it. Like literally with nothing. And I have videos that I brought with me that are available for people to see in one of the websites that I handle. And also, I went to these hospitals. I did a census of all the hospitals. We did the census of all the hospitals, So I went to a few of them, and literally, Idaga Arab Hospital, for instance, totally still in that situation where they literally used arson to burn every room, to destroy every chair, every whatever equipment that is in there. And you can see it. I mean, this is not an happenstance of war where, some shelling came and attacked hospital. This was deliberately done. Even they defecated inside these rooms to show, how much hateful, spiteful people who invaded Tigray from Eritrea, Fano, and of course the federal government. So I think it is important that we use this data to talk about, to advocate to what we bring from even our experiences when we visit Tigray or when we talk to our family, friends, and colleagues in the Tigray region. I think, with that, I really would like to thank you, Duke, for all you do. But more importantly, this is just the beginning. We will be collaborating on, I think, matters that are of important to the humanity, to the cause of humanity. And in this case, our work on Tigray will continue. Have a very restful rest of your day. Again, thank you so much, and to all our listeners, we would like to thank you for joining us, for listening to the conversation. If you have any questions, feel free to send them via email, write comments on each of the platforms where this video will be shared. And you know where to find me. My Twitter account is at Prof. Murgita. You could also find Duke at Burbridge Duke. That's his Twitter handle, or X handle as they call it now. And so long. Thank you so much, and we will see you again next week.
The humanitarian crisis in northern Ethiopia is growing worse by the day.